A commenter on my video about Skyland Trail Inpatient Residential Treatment Center for Indoctrination noticed that the address of the place is on Druid Hills Road. And Druid Hills is a very old, very well-known, established Atlanta neighborhood that I've known about all my life, but I have never even thought about the name until they made that comment. But Druids are witches, so it may as well been named Witch Hills. The world is run by witches, is what I'm trying to tell you. The more history you study, the more obvious it becomes. Druid Hills is an old money neighborhood conceived by Joel Hurt and developed with the effort of Atlanta's leading families, including Coca-Cola founder Asa Candler. The name Druid Hills was chosen by the neighborhood's developer, Joel Hurt, and the designer, John C. Olmsted, who were partners in the development of that neighborhood. It says that Olmsted and his sons created the neighborhood with rolling hills, similar to those where the Celtic Druids practiced religion, medicine, and magic in ancient Britain. Olmsted used this quote from Longfellow's Evangeline to refer to why he named it as such. Here's the quote. "This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks, bearded with moss and in garments green, indistinct in the twilight, stand like druids of old, with voices sad and prophetic, stand like harpers hoar, with beards that rest on their bosoms." So that's the end of that quote. And harpers are just spies. The term originated with bards in taverns that play harps while listening in on conversations to get information for their elites. So I'm going to play a brief video about Druid Hills now. It's propaganda, but it has some nice pictures and gives you an idea of the place.
Downtown Atlanta, Druid Hills is well situated with easy access to three major interstates: the Downtown Connector, the Beltline, and the Path Bikeway. Restaurants, parks, and shops abound. Atlanta land developer Joel Hurt described Druid Hills as the ideal residential suburb. Initially conceived by Hurt in the late 1800s, he went about commissioning American landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, designer of New York Central Park, and his sons John and Frederick Jr. to design the community. The establishment of Druid Hills gained impetus, with efforts from Atlanta's elite and leading families, including Coca-Cola founder Asa Griggs Candler. Candler's mansion is located in Druid Hills, as is Callenwold, the home of the eldest son Charles Howard Candler, Lullwater House, home of the third son Walter Turner Candler, and Rainbow Terrace, also known as Lullwater Estate, home of his only daughter Lucy Candler Hines. The design plan of Druid Hills is a departure from the grid organization of Atlanta. The very essence of the Druid Hills topography is open and green with flowing spaces, as if one is living in a park. Originally lined with streetcars and trolleys, a main Druid Hills thoroughfare is Ponce de Leon Avenue, often simply called Ponce. Some of the parks along Ponce de Leon Avenue are Shadyside Park, Springdale Park, Delwood Park, Brightwood Park, and Parkwood Park. These are all linear parks that wrap along the curvature of the streets. Set back from the street are generous-sized homes with large lots, eclectic architecture, and English-inspired gardens. Druid Hills' largest linear park is the 65-acre Fernbank Forest, complete with hiking trails, native wildlife, and natural history museum.
Druid Hills with input of Atlanta's elite. And that's where they lived. Witch Hills. See what I mean? I didn't investigate Asa Candler, one of the investors of this neighborhood and founder of Coca-Cola, but I'm sure it's not good. And we know that modern depiction of Santa comes from the Coca-Cola advertisements, but is actually a druid. And we know that Coca-Cola did once contain coca leaf extract, from which cocaine is derived. And Elon Musk said in a tweet that he'd buy Coca-Cola to put the cocaine back in. And this is that tweet. So Druid Hills is home of Emory University, which is a research university, and I talk about those a lot on this channel. The secret societies at Emory University are the Palladian Society, and we've talked about Palladians before. They were the 12 peers of Charlemagne's court. Another secret society at Emory is the Order of Ammon, and this is their symbol. Ammon is an Egyptian god with the horns of a ram. And Druid Hills is also home of Fernbank Science Center, which they make school children take field trips to and is full of lies. And also the Space Observatory is another place for field trips, also with lies. And it's also the home of the CDC, or the Centers for Disease Control. And this looks like the Centers for Disease Cause, if you ask me. Let's look at Joel Hurt, and then we'll look at John C. Olmsted, the landscape architect. So Joel Hurt founded Druid Hills along with Olmsted, and he was known as a Renaissance man, progressive developer, and one of the founders of SunTrust Bank. Hurt graduated from University of Georgia. I didn't find out if he was in a secret society, but he probably was. Gridiron is a secret society at UGA, which is affiliated with Skull and Bones, and University of Georgia also has the Order of the Greek Horsemen. Most of the development in Atlanta took place relatively shortly after the Civil War ended in 1865, when Atlanta was burned. So figure that one out, and we'll talk about it later as well. And also see my playlist titled Confederate Vampires. But the founding of this neighborhood was chartered by a corporation called Druid Hills Corporation, composed of Asa Candler of the Coca-Cola Company, George Adair, Georgia Railway, and electric company president Preston Ackright. But George Adair ran Atlanta's oldest realty company, and that was started by his father, Colonel George Adair, and that was following immediately after the Civil War. Do you see how that works? It says here that in 1908, Hurt was unrepentant in hearings, which brought about the shocking abuses in the Hurt family's convict labor camps. His callous indifference to evidence that many of his workers had died of abuse, and his viciously asserting that convict workers could not be beaten enough, horrified even contemporary Georgians. Hurt's mother, Lucy Long Hurt, was daughter of a man named Nimrod Washington Long. Here's that lineage. Okay. Nimrod. This heritage down here, Akkadian heritage, this at the bottom here, said Lucy, and it also says this on Nimrod, is 14 degrees related to Beyonce Knowles. So that means by 14 generations. And this family made a fortune off selling war supplies. But the Beyonce Knowles connection I find very interesting for this reason. So the oldest restaurant in Atlanta is Atkins Park. And Atkins Park is in the Virginia Highlands neighborhood, another historic neighborhood right next to Druid Hills. And it was first a deli, and then it was a tavern, and it's been in business for over 100 years, which is a long time for a restaurant. But it's a witchcraft place. Their symbol is the phoenix. They've got this phoenix all over everything. Phoenix on the sign, phoenix on the windows, phoenix over the bar. My niece refers to it as an old haunt, and I went there last year on her recommendation, which I'll never do again. And I went up to the bar just to get some darts, and there were brass plates of famous people who had been there before on that bar, and Beyonce Knowles had a plaque there on the bar. And whenever I get a super creepy feeling about a place, I do research, and I did some research and found that there is literally a demon in this restaurant. According to the owner and longtime bartender, quote, "There's a woman's face coming out of a wall where it shouldn't be. There's nothing reflective on the surface. I didn't know and I don't like to speculate, but the upstairs is haunted, obviously. We call it the ghost room. There's a photograph that does have a reflection of a woman in the deli counter, and oddly enough, she looks exactly like my daughter when she was about 6 or 7 years old. And it's really kind of spooky. The ghost room has been spoken about for many, many years." End of quote. So that was a side note, but all these witches are connected, you see. They travel in the same circles and go to the same places. So then Joel Hurt hired this landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted. He was the architect for Druid Hills, the landscape architect. And Frederick Law Olmsted appears to be a witch also, and he also designed the Vanderbilt Biltmore Gardens. For more information about the Vanderbilts, see my video titled All Souls and Tanit. And this guy was considered to be the father of landscaped architecture in the United States. But he was also a public administrator, a journalist, a social critic. He facilitated a gold mine in California and provided supplies for the Civil War. So he's another polymath. And his ancestors arrived in the United States in the 1600s from Essex, England. And one of those ancestors was Richard Olmsted, who came to the U.S. on a merchant ship called the Lion, which sailed from Thames, England, in 1632 and arrived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and then he moved on to be one of the founders of Connecticut. This guy's ancestor. And he's listed on the Founder's Stone bearing the names of the founders of Hartford, and he's in the ancient burying ground. And he served in the General Court of the Connecticut colony. He was a captain in King Philip's War. And that same Richard, this guy's ancestor, was married to a Frances and a Magdalene. And here are all the notable witches from the Olmsted family. Early settlers, of course, like I already went over, politicians, poets, historians, astronomers, landowners, war generals, scientists, etc. But our landscape designer of Druid Hills, Frederick Olmsted, who decided to name it Druid Hills because it, quote, he wanted to create a neighborhood with rolling hills similar to those where the Celtic Druids practiced religion, medicine, and magic in ancient Britain. This Olmsted here, he was famous for designing many well-known urban parks, including Central Park in New York, which led to many other urban and national park designs. He was a member, or he was a leader in the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and that was a precursor to the Red Cross. And this is their symbol. It says he contributed to organizing a sanitary fair, which raised $1 million for the U.S. Sanitary Commission during the Civil War. The Sanitary Commission was created to, quote, support sick and wounded soldiers in the U.S. Army during the Civil War, and he played a major role in organizing and providing medical services to the Union Army during the Civil War. It says he helped recruit and outfit 3 African American regiments of the U.S. colored troops in New York City. I bet he did. Problem, reaction, solution. It says that he was interested in the slave economy, so he was commissioned by the New York Times to embark on extensive research of the antebellum South slave economy. He was one of the 6 founding members of the Union League Club of New York. And that was a social club in New York for businessmen during the Civil War. And this is from one of the ceremonies of that club. And that does not look too good. Olmsted's character is featured in the book Devil in the White City, which is about an 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. There's an Olmsted.org site with an article about the book titled Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America, about that book, Devil in the White City. And the book is basically about a serial killer at that fair. And a lot of people have covered that Chicago World's Fair, and I hadn't looked into it that much, but I will go ahead and just say for sure those buildings were not permanent buildings like the little seasoned mud flood people like to say. They're made with a type of stucco that can be rather easily put up and taken down, and I find it weird and telling that the little seasoned people would focus so much on those expeditions and those buildings. That seems intentional and symbolic and suspicious. Those fair buildings were temporary and, quote, glistening white buildings created by an architect, and his name was Burnham. And it says that he believed that it was important to, quote, make no little plans, as they have no magic to stir a man's blood. So Olmsted created the landscape designed for that fair, the Chicago World's Fair. And it says, having experienced life on the ocean during his long service in China trade, which is the opium trade, he was interested in ensuring a memorable boating experience. So he brought over 100 million plants, including 100,000 willow trees, to this lagoon. It says, while the World's Fair proved to be a great success, its creation was nothing short of Herculean. But do not be fooled by these people. These witches that rule the world, rebuke them. They're murderers. Thanks for listening.